like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to review the global spending on cancer research and to share my observations with you. And I will look at it in a translational research perspective. And if we are looking first on the basic research, that is where most of the public, that's the taxpayer financed, and the philanthropic charities, voluntary contributions from individuals, that's where the majority of the research funding is spent. In clinical research, it's totally dominated by the pharmaceutical industry, and that's for clinical trials aimed at commercialization of product and to meet the regulatory approval criteria. When it comes to late translational research, there is very little funding. There's very little funding. It's a few percent of the total funding, which is in this, and I will come back to that. Investment in cancer research obviously is important to develop new cancer medicines and other preventive or therapeutic interventions. All the patients are looking for a cure for cancer, and we have cured some cancers also. But of course, most of the innovations which come to the market is what Louis Thomas would call halfway technologies. They are important for some patients. They are complicated. It's uncertain exactly what the outcome is for the patients, and they are expensive. And that's, of course, research about these technologies, the relative effectiveness and cost effectiveness, and about allocation of resources for cancer prevention and cure is also key for delivering outcomes for patients. And we have talked about the introduction of new cancer medicines. In the last 10 years, there's been 50% more cancer medicine introduced than in the whole time of the mankind until 2015. So this is how rapidly this development is. If we look at research in general, and particularly late-stage cancer research, it is what economists call it's a global public good. If we get the knowledge that we can use one dose of HPV vaccination, all countries, all healthcare systems could use this knowledge. It doesn't take away, it doesn't cost anything for any other healthcare system to use this knowledge. What we have seen here is of course that even if it's a global public good, when it comes to research on efficiency and equity and healthcare system, we also need to do research in specific population. Like, for example, in low and middle income countries, the most important research is not to develop new products, it's actually about how to use the available evidence in the best possible way. As we have seen here, many good examples from breast cancer, from radiotherapy, etc. And this research is very important for the patients. Well, why do we need data about how much we are spending on cancer research? Well, for an economist, it's always interesting to know how much are we spending and how are we spending it. And of course, why is that interesting? Because if we should be able to have a dialogue and have an informed discussion about spending on cancer research, we have to know about how much we are spending, because how has spending developed? Are we over time spending less or more? What is the spending in relation to the burden of cancer, in relation to other diseases, etc.? And spending on different types of cancer research, we have to have, it's obviously very difficult to have precise evidence about how we should spend money on cancer research. But we have to have some idea of how we are spending the money, to have an informed discussion, how we could improve spending. For example, that now we are in a situation where we need to spend much more on late translational research. I've tried to find out how much we are spending on cancer research, and I started with 2005, because 2005 was actually the only global study, comprehensive global study performed. Actually, Richard Sullivan was part of that, who is sitting here. They tried to look into both public and philanthropic and also private for-profit spending. I will here look at the public and philanthropic spending. And you can see that from 2005 to 2024, it has increased from $13 billion to 24. If we are taking away the increase in prices, well, it's reasonably the same with the uncertainties about the estimates. If we are looking at who is spending this money on public, it is Europe spending $4 billion, US is spending $6 billion. So it's US and Europe, mainly the richer countries in Western Europe, who are spending on basic cancer research. The rest of the world is very little, but we have heard here also, it is changing, and it is changing rapidly. If you are looking at the difference between US and Europe, US spending is mainly by National Cancer Institute and National Institute of Health. It's mainly the public taxpayer money, rather small part of philanthropic spending. The European situation is much more scattered. It's about 50-50 between taxpayers and also the general public. We can see also in Europe, it has been in fixed prices a small increase. I think the increase has you can see where we really have scattered data, and of course you have sometimes to try to answer the question, why is nobody interested to redo the study from 2005? Why is it totally impossible to get any cancer research funder to give the small amount of money needed to get the necessary data to discuss how much and how we are spending on cancer care? We have discussed a lot of the European Union. That's why the European Union is spending a lot, but it's a very, very small amount on the spending. It's a few percent of the spending on public and philanthropic. That means, of course, also that what we really need is to have a coordinated discussion of the spending, and that's one of my problems I have to really understand why the European Union, who is going into these efforts now here, is not really taking that initiative. If we are looking at the private for-profit spending on cancer research, this is the pharmaceutical industry spending on cancer research. And cancer has obviously now taken over from cardiovascular diseases in terms of drug development. Nobody today is talking about drug development in cardiovascular disease. Nobody talks about the cost of cardiovascular drugs. Everybody is talking about the cost of cancer drugs, because this is now what, of course, has happened here also in the pharmaceutical industry. It's difficult to get some idea about exactly what they're spending, but if you look at their own report, what they are spending, they have increased the spending from $6 to $60 billion on cancer research, what they call, which is about 25% of their total spending. And you can also see, of course, they have also increased the total R&D spending, but particularly they have devoted more resources to cancer cancer research. What, of course, has happened here, which is, of course, in looking at US and Western Europe, is that increasingly the patients who are involved in the clinical trial come from low and middle income countries. And that's of course also a consequence for late translational research, because they are not patients which are in the healthcare system in US, in Europe, and we really need to complement that. So there is a dramatic increase, and this is also to remember that this is private for-profit spending, but it's paid by the public, okay? It's paid by those who buy the cancer drugs, which is the public healthcare systems, it's all the compulsory healthcare systems, or Medicare and Medicaid. So it's basically the taxpayers who is paying for this as well. So if we look at the development since 2005, we can see that the public spending has, of course, increased. The private spending has increased even more. So private spending on R&D was half of the public in 2005, but it's twice as much in 20 years. 20 years later. And this is, of course, you have to see, well, this is what we spend on cancer research, and then, of course, we need also to have a discussion of how should we spend it. If we are looking at the public charity spending on different types of cancer research, and this is it's a rather recent study published in Lancet Oncology, looking at global funding on looking at cancer grants. And actually, if you're looking at that, that's about 5 billion a year. So it's not really covering all. It's only covering about a third of the total public spending. But you can still see here that it's totally dominated by preclinical research. There's a few percent spent on radiology and surgery. But this spending of also preclinical research, which of course now increasingly is also spent in China, is of course the pool from which the pharmaceutical industry develops its new drugs. So systematic collection and publication of data on investments is needed for all stages of the translational cancer research. We have to see how we are spending it in order to have a balanced. And we can also see that philanthropic and public funding, it was 2 times more in 2005, but it has been now reduced to about half. And the public and philanthropic funding for late translational research amount to about 4% of the total pharmaceutical industry funding and 1% of the public spending on cancer medicines. So we are seeing that we have a real big gap here, because what is needed to manage the technologies which are getting out. So how do we fund? We can't really reallocate resources from basic and clinical research. We still need that resource, and we can also see that it has not increased in real terms over the last 20 years. So what I could think about here, what do you do when you need some money, you like to do something? You put on a research charge, you put on a tax, an earmark tax for translational research on the financing of because the medicines, which now the healthcare systems are paid for, they don't have the data necessary to make the best possible outcomes for patients and the most effective cancer care. If you put in a 10% research charge, I put in 10% because there is evidence that we can reach at least a 30% improvement in efficiency by, like with the one-dose HPV vaccination, we can reduce cost and we could improve outcome. It was, since the majority of the cancer medicines are spent in the richer countries, they will pay for this as well. But the benefits of the studies which we could do with this money is something which could be used in all countries to reduce costs and improve outcome. So we can see that public and private not-for-profit research funding is increasing, but at a slow pace. Private for-profit research in developing new cancer has increased at a high speed. Research on outcome for patients on survival and quality of life of new medicines, as we have heard several presentations here, it's lacking and create large uncertainties about efficiency and their use in clinical practice. For example, we are spending an enormous amount of money on health technology assessment, but health technology assessment is an assessment of relevant comparative clinical trials which are non-existent. So unequal access and inefficiency in cancer care can be avoided with an increase in cancer research aimed at providing the relevant information for allocation of resources for cancer care. Thank you very much.